My husband has been a park ranger for years now, and he's got a handful of scary things that have happened to him over his time just trying to maintain the park and do his job. One that always gets to him is when he was working on a segment of trail, fixing it. I don't recall precisely what he was doing, but he saw a rare sight that you pretty much never see in nature. A pack of wolves. Now, off in the distance, there was a large meadow. At the end of this meadow was a steep hill, littered with sparsely placed fir and oak trees. The wolves, an entire pack of them, were running at high speeds down this hill, then across the meadow. As my husband watched this happen in front of him, he saw that these wolves weren't just running to a destination in mind. They were clearly spooked. Spooked by something. The entire pack, mind you. That's when they were crossing the meadow, and a loud guttural scream came roaring far from the distance from the direction that they had just come from. Few of the wolves in front of the pack nervously turned their heads to look behind them in the course of the screaming. The scream lasted for a whopping 12 to 14 seconds, my husband had told me. Whatever made the screaming had to have a massive set of lungs. There's nothing out there in the woods that makes that kind of noise. Not to his knowledge. My husband also has extensive wilderness survival training and knows just about every animal that you can run into out there. He's never heard anything like that scream in his entire life. It scared him more than it scared the wolves that were running from it. I used to work in the Forest Service. I worked as a park ranger for many years and have my fair share of creepy tales and stories. In fact, I could honestly write a book about all my happenings during my time as a ranger, but I will leave you with just this one. My story took place in Yellowstone many years ago. I will not reveal the exact location because the park is so large, but people in that area have reported at the time strange noises and seeing large shadows moving around. As a park ranger, you have to learn to deflect information with what is real and what is not true. Lots of people see things because they get paranoid when they are outside of their element. It is a natural human occurrence. We had been warning people that the area might not be safe, but there was a couple that decided to not only camp in that area, but camp so far back beyond the trail where they were not allowed. Their tent and belongings were discovered only a few days later, off trail, by hikers. The disturbing part of the story was that they were missing. Their tent and all of their belongings were scattered, bloody, and torn up. It clearly looked like their campsite had been ravaged. It could have possibly been a mountain lion attack, or even a bear. About a quarter mile away from the campsite, we found something. Further away from the trail, we found an unknown and unidentified pile of scat. We weren't able to pinpoint it to a specific animal in the area, but it resembled that of huge dog poop. It did not resemble bear scat or mountain lion scat in any way. Samples were obtained and taken in for analysis. When the tests came back, there were no signs of any human remains in the scat. However, various other remains of animals were in this scat, like small pieces of bone, tissue, etc. Whatever poop it was, it clearly came from a carnivorous animal. If it was waste that came from a wolf, mind you, it was the most considerable wolf droppings I've ever seen in my life. Because this case involved 2 missing persons, the police had to be called in and an actual investigation followed after. The result of the investigation was that the couple were never found, even through extensive searching of the area for days afterward. I think this couple even made it into one of David Paulides' books, Missing 411, though I'm not too sure. This kind of thing happens far more than you would ever believe. To my knowledge, no bodies were ever recovered. Park ranger here had a terrifying experience back in the fall of 2016 when the whole clown craze was going on. Let me explain. Back in early October, I was scheduled to work on a night shift. From my lookout point, I could see what appeared to be fire from a short distance away. When I went to go investigate, and I could get closer, it appeared that it was actually looking like a congregation of people holding torches. What in the hell? Why would there be people out here in the middle of the night? At least 50 of them holding torches in a semicircle. Now, the first thing that came to my mind is some kind of satanic ritual circle. That within itself is far above my pay grade, and I wasn't about to go and try and interrupt that. But I got a better look at the situation, and to my horror, it was some sort of ritual. What I was looking at was about 60 to 70 people dressed up in clown costumes. I'm talking full makeup and everything. Each one of them holding a torch, standing in a loose circle. They weren't talking or doing anything. I don't recall them making any noise whatsoever, just staring off into space or staring off blankly at each other. I ran back to my post immediately and called my boss and told him what was going on. He told me to not hesitate to phone the police if I considered anything to get out of hand. I quickly kept a look on the situation and saw that they were dividing into what looked like groups of 2 from what I could see and venturing off into the woods, all separately in every which direction, except the direction where my post was at. I don't know if there's some sort of clown ritual or some sort of cult that meets up and dresses like that, but the experience was weird. This was about 1:45 a.m. in the morning and lasted maybe the entirety of a whole 15 minutes before they all dissipated into groups of 2 off in the night wilderness. I have no explanation at all for what I saw that night, nor do I know anything about a clown cult. I'm a former park ranger Forest Service employee. I've spent far too much time out in the forest and have taken away too many awful memories from that career path. I've seen people who have gone out into the woods by themselves and hung themselves. I've seen people who got lost and died of exposure. I've been on search teams where we would go to rescue somebody, and they're not to be found anywhere. The worst is when you encounter missing children, and if you've ever heard or listened to anything about missing children, then you'll know and understand just how awful that is. It's a job that you have to learn to be hardened and put aside your emotions to deal with the task at hand. However, that's in regard to the emotional and traumatic side of things that you deal with on the job. Then, there's an entirely different segment of the job. The segment of the job that puts you in fear and harm's way. It's probably no surprise to you that there are things in the wilderness that we have no idea what or where they came from. I can't sit here and boast to you that I've seen stairs in the middle of the woods. No, nothing like that. No portals, nothing crazy. But that doesn't mean that I haven't spoken with colleagues that have, and have had vivid nightmares about things they've witnessed by themselves. For me, I had never truly felt terror until this specific day, where I was looking for an individual that had been reported last seen on this trail in an area. He had only been missing for a few hours, and I was checking the trail in which he was last seen on. I couldn't help but shake this feeling that something was watching me. At first, I figured it was the lost hiker, and maybe he was trying to get best my attention. I realized quickly that that wasn't the case. This, whatever I was feeling, had an energy to it. A really bad feeling. I could sense it in my stomach. You know how just like when you feel like you're in severe danger, you just have this pit in the bottom of your stomach, like you know something bad is about to take place. That's what I felt. I kept glancing over my shoulder in hopes this lost hiker would step out and show gratitude to me for finding him. Well, that never happened. Instead, I began to see moving shapes around me, hidden behind the trees. Maybe shapes aren't the best terminology to use here. It was more like blurred, opaque figures, if that makes sense. Like something was cloaked. You can't make this stuff up. I was really beginning to freak out. And against my better training and experience out in the woods, I began doing what years and years of training taught me not to do. Panic. I was coming up on a part of the trail where I know I could cut through and get back to the main base area in just a mile. The trail I was on looped around, and had I continued on with the trail, it would have taken me much more time to get back. Because I knew the trail so well and where my location was, I used that to my advantage and cut through the woods to make my way back swiftly. The feeling followed me, and I stopped glancing back over my shoulders to see if these opaque, blurred shapes were following me. Instead, I put my full focus on getting back to base and reporting that I did not find an individual. I safely made it back after hauling it like I had since training and trying to keep up with my superiors. The entire experience was nerve-wracking, and the rest of the day, I just felt so off. Drained of energy, as if I had just ran 12 miles and spent the entire day out in the hot, blazing sun. Let me explain this to you. At the time, I was in top physical prime condition. Naturally, I was a machine and walked 20,000 plus steps a day. I kept in great shape, and it took a lot for me to feel as drained as I did. I've not had a day on the job where I felt like this, or remotely close. A measly 2.5 mile stroll on a trail like that wasn't going to do that to me. I remember feeling severely dehydrated too. Like whatever was following me zapped me of my energy and hydration. I know fear can do a lot of things to you, but that seemed to be an overkill, drastically. I don't know what things I saw in the woods stalking me, but I felt nothing but bad energy radiating off of these things. I felt like I was a deer being hunted, and that if I stopped for more than a minute, I was done for. I've told several of my colleagues about the same story, and to my horror, they have similar stories with very similar beings, as they call them. Maybe I'll share some of them with you sometime when I get more time to sit down and write it all out. Thanks. I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon, and from the position I was in, I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I laid there, enjoying the scenery, and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was somebody hiking up the trail with no headlamp on or any gear. I was just frozen, watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain, where we were, and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveying our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned, sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there, staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do, so I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on till about 3:30 a.m. Then, he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came upon. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. A couple of years ago, I went camping with my brother and old roommate of mine. This was in one of the national forests in Oregon. We were pretty high up, kind of near an old ghost town. Not really a dangerous area. but there are a lot of black bears and some cougars. I set up my hammock with the tarp draped over to keep the rain out. Then, I got pretty drunk and went to bed. Well, since I drank my weight in beer, I woke up in the middle of the night and had to pee. I lifted up the tarp to peek out with a flashlight, and that's when I saw two eyes staring back at me. They were about 20 feet away. I was using one of those stupid $2 hardware store LED lights, so it didn't throw a beam. So I couldn't see what was behind the eyes. All I could see was that they were far apart. My first instinct was to turn off the light and stay where I was. But it was so close, and then I wouldn't be able to see it. We had 3 guns, but I left mine in the truck. I came to the conclusion that the only thing to do was to stay perfectly still and keep the light on so I could see it. So, I draped my other leg out of the hammock and was ready to bolt for the truck if it charged me. I stayed in this position for what felt like forever, until I noticed that the eyes had not moved at all. So I took a chance. I slowly got out of the hammock and began moving around the eyes, keeping about 20 feet between us. I was moving towards the truck. Once I got to the side, I saw it. It was a pair of binoculars, left open, sitting on a stump. With a light, they reflected just like a pair of eyes. And in my half-drunk state, it never occurred to me that this could possibly be it. I put the binoculars away and went to sleep. I know that this isn't actually a dangerous experience. I've actually encountered wild animals before, but this is by far the most scared I've ever been, and for the most amount of time, of course. I'm a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. Despite the fact that I live in a fairly suburban area, the forest preserves still make up about 12% of the county, with much of the property being heavily wooded. Not far out wilderness, but pretty secluded in some areas. Being a seasonal employee, I've been on the job for a bit over a month now, but in my short time here, I've found 3 things. Number 1, a dead man in a tree. The rest of the rangers say they find about 1 suicide a year, so here was the one for the year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in a clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops and the coroner. Friggin' coroner took an hour to show up, and he was the only one with a ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So I stared at a dead guy in a tree for about an hour. Number 2, crazed, drugged up, naked man running around a parking lot. Took me and 3 other rangers to catch the guy, and when we finally caught him, found out he had multiple cuts across his body from running through brush and rock lodged firmly up his, well, I'll let you guess. Number 3, Headless Deer. Normally, when a pack of coyotes take down a deer, yes, we have a bunch of coyotes around here, they leave bite marks all over the body, along with torn off flesh everywhere. But the head was cleanly sliced off and placed directly next to the body, meaning this is something created by human intervention. We still haven't figured out that one yet, and I've only been on the job for 5 weeks. I live in northeast Oklahoma, and I consider myself a camping and fishing enthusiast. One spring night, me and 2 friends decided to go fishing. It's around midnight, and we're going to a place that was once a maintained primitive camping area. This is not a remote location, but it's not very well known either. As we approach the turnoff for our spot, we see another vehicle slowly turning out off of it and proceeding in the way in which we came. We pass them, and a friend says how he figured no one else would be around. We get to our spot, get our gear out, and begin to prepare. But as we chat, drink a few beers, we all notice an unspoken easiness. Something is just not right. Usually, I'm a trooper, fishing until the sun comes up. but I'm the first to crack. I explain to my friends how I feel, that we should leave, and I just have a bad feeling. They agree. We load up. While slowly driving through the old campground, we notice some brightly glowing embers in an area where nobody has been. My friend driving stops without even thinking and goes for a look. He is startled, telling us to come see. What we saw was the remains of 3 crosses, made of wood that would stand about 12 inches if upright. But they had been burned, along with a small campfire. And to make it even better, all were lying on freshly turned soil, which resembled a freshly dug grave. We freaked, got the hell out of there fast. Thank you, sweet baby Jesus. We are home free, we all thought. When we approached the exit of the old campground, we noticed a vehicle parked on the side of the road. We passed it, and we all realize it's the same car we passed on the way in. There was nobody in the car. They had doubled back and were likely watching us, waiting to do who knows what. Not a pro, but more than 1,000 days in the backcountry over the past decade. I have always been drawn to the wild. It seems like home, and I generally know my neighbors out there. Not afraid to be in the deep woods, in the dark. I love my woods. One sunny weekend afternoon, I had dirt biked up an old mining road. It gained a couple thousand feet from the valley floor towards one of the ridges of the Cascades. When the road gave out near the bottom of a high basin, I put my backpack and started off cross-country toward the ridge. It was still heavily forested, old growth and old cut fading in another 1,000 feet into those scraggly wind-blown ones near the top. About 20 minutes in, and about a half mile up from me, near the tree line, I heard this thumping sound. It was very odd, so I stopped to listen carefully. It sounded like a big, solid branch was being whacked against a solid tree. I use the term solid because the hits were powerful. One or both of the pieces of wood were hard and dry. The wood resonated and rang on impact as dry wood will. I couldn't get over the power though. It sounded like somebody was swinging a 4-inch post. Weird, right? Well, it gets better. This someone sounded like they were trying to communicate. The thumping had a very complex and well-defined pattern. And here's the weirdest part. The thumping signal occasionally became very rapid, like what a drummer could do if they were noodling around with a stick. But I swear, it sounded like a 4-inch post was being treated lightly as a drumstick. I listened for maybe 5 minutes, just fascinated with the sound. This code and the power of it. Then, the drumming suddenly stopped, and I kind of woke up to the fear of this unknown thing out there. I had my pistol, I had my bear spray, and my knife. I really only fear cougars, and even then, I figured they'll have a bad day trying to take me down. Still, the silence as I stared into the forest ahead seemed loaded, and I turned on my heels and left that valley. That place and that experience just gave me the chills, and that high valley won't ever see my shadow again. I have read stories about some of the native people around here having valleys that they just wouldn't go into. I can now easily understand how these legends get started. Hi, what lurks beneath. Right now, I'm reminiscing back on when I used to be able to go on hikes and do cross-country trips. But since quarantine, that's kind of been shut down, and I prefer to stay safe inside. Although I don't really prefer the inside, I love being outside, in the outdoors, in nature. I'm not a proficient or experienced outdoorsman by any stretch of the means, so I don't want you to get that idea before I share this with you. But I do enjoy my long hiking trips, and any chance I can get to go spend outside. Now, this particular event that I'm going to share with you happened years ago when I was hiking out in the Ozarks. I had spent miles and days doing a single solo hiking trip. I came to a small clearing at night, up in an area that was kind of hard to get to, where I was going to set up my tent and crash out for the night. This area that this large clearing was in wasn't easy to get to. After clearing some steep rocks and climbing through really thick brush for a couple hours just to get far, far away from any trail or human contact, because I do enjoy the isolation. I'm stating this because whoever was out here that did this, I'm not sure how they got out here or why they were here, but I guess that might be revealed to the reader as I describe the event. The clearing that I was in was surrounded by trees, although there was a small hill that you had to cross. So, I didn't notice this at first. I started setting up my tent, and then I had to go gather firewood. So I walked over this small hill, and that's right when I saw this. It was about 20 to 30 feet in diameter, if I had to guess. It was a large pentagram burnt into the ground. Not only was the grass around it dead, but the trees around this pentagram were also dead and appeared to be burnt by some high-intensity flame. In the center of this pentagram lied a small pile of charred bodies. Not humans, but small animal bodies. I observed the sighting a little closer, and I couldn't tell because the bodies were so charred, but they appeared to be small dogs from what I could tell. Either way, I got a really bad feeling. It's like the entire atmosphere around me just changed, and I began to feel uncomfortable. That's when I started to feel that I was being watched, that maybe I wasn't alone, and there was someone else or something else around me. I still wonder how they were able to burn that into the ground, and why all the trees and everything else around was burnt. I don't know what you'd even use for that, or why it was done, all the way out here, far off any trail, in the middle of nowhere. But I guess I'm not meant to have those answers. Anyway, after seeing that pentagram, I ran down, packed up my tent, and quickly found another spot about an hour or two later on, when it was dark. Yeah, setting up my tent in the dark. That was fun, but I sure as hell wasn't going to sleep around that. So, this occurred about 7 years ago, when I went fishing in the southern part of the Ozarks with a good buddy. We had started off in the morning, and our plan was to find a really good fishing spot along a creek. I didn't really know the Ozarks that well, but my buddy did, which is why I was letting him lead. Well, during our trekking and adventure, we began hearing a horrible noise off in the distance. Now, because of where we were in the forest, it was really hard to tell how far away sound was, because when you're in the woods, especially the deep, thick woods, sound can travel kind of funny, and sometimes you can have a really hard time distinguishing just how close noise is. But this sounded like it was loud enough that it was far away, that I think we're safe, even though after we heard it, we got out of there. What we heard were two distinct, loud roars. Well, it wasn't just one. This was continuous. It sounded like two Tyrannosaurus Rexes fighting. If you've ever watched the movie Jurassic Park, you know how loud those things are? I mean, they come from massive animals. Although fictional in the movie, it had that same kind of volume, which meant that whatever animal was making it had to have been huge. Now, I'm not saying there was two T-Rexes out in the woods. What I'm saying is that we heard noises at that same volume capacity, incredibly loud that it shook the woods around us, and there was two of them, and it sounded ferocious, like there was some sort of fight going on. I don't know what the hell that was all about, nor do I know what animal it even belonged to. My buddy looked at me, and he was pale as a ghost. He didn't answer me when I asked him what animal that was. He didn't have an answer, and it wasn't until afterwards when we got a chance to sit down and actually talk about it that I asked him about it. He said he had never heard that in the woods before, and he's been out there multiple times. To our knowledge, any wildlife or natural-born animal that lives in that area of the United States doesn't have that sort of lung capacity to make that volume of a roar, let alone even sound exactly like that. The tone and pitch kind of reminded me if it came from a 50-foot alligator or something of that size. You know, when you watch enough movies, you can kind of get the chance to hear how loud some of these fictional creatures are. And although they are fake and from movies, I feel like they get the volume quite right when you have an animal of that capacity. Anyway, I'm just trying to get the point across that whatever was making these roaring noises had to have been incredibly massive, and it didn't sound like any animal I have ever heard in my life. Same with my friend. While I didn't encounter a Bigfoot or anything like that, I did have a disturbing account, all of my own. This happened in Central Oregon. Now, I don't know if I had wandered into an area where somebody had opted out of this world, but my findings disturbed me, to say the least. I found a pair of bloody shoes on the ground in the middle of the forest during my hike. After quickly observing my surroundings, I found nothing. No signs of a body, no signs of a blood trail or where these would lead to. These looked like pretty clean, fresh new sneakers from what I could tell. They were covered in dried blood and just laying there, right on the ground, as if somebody had just taken them off, right there in the middle of the forest, and that was it. I don't know what that was about, but it still creeps me out to think about to this day. So I believe this happened back when I was hiking the Sierra Nevadas. This would have been about 2011, and I believe I stumbled upon a den of some animal. Probably a bear or a cougar, whatever lives up there. But that's not the scary part. I found multiple human skulls in this cavern. Probably about 8 or 9, if I'm counting right. Upon first entering the cavern, I thought it might have just been a shallow alcove, until I realized that it dipped down deeper. And so my curiosity got the best of me, and I had a flashlight on me. Although this cave wasn't deep, I was able to go in enough that I can kind of see that it opened up into a larger chamber. I didn't see any hiking equipment, or full bodies, or full skeletons of people. Just about 8 or 9 skulls of people. They looked to be pretty weathered and old, like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any other bones, at least any that I could identify. There were a lot of other miscellaneous bones, like animal skulls, and I think a few rib bones here and there, things like that. But no full human skeleton, like you would expect from a movie. Either way, I saw that, it freaked me out, and I noped right out of there. At the time, I wasn't carrying a GPS with me, or even a map, so I couldn't tell you where exactly along the mountain range that this small little cavern was. But either way, it really scared me, and I guess I should have contacted the authorities about it, but I never really did. So I don't know if those are skulls of people who had gone missing and wound up in there, in that den, of whatever lived in there. Do bears even make dens in caverns like that, and eat on animals and people? I don't know. I don't know the kind of den that cougars live in either. So again, this is all just speculation. But what's not speculation is the fact that I found about 8 or 9 human skulls. That did happen. In order to keep my identity and location as private as possible, I'll be revealing minimal details about where I live. But I will say that I live in the southeastern section of the United States. Not Florida, though. The area in which I live in is a very large valley filled with lots of thick woods. But here's the disturbing part of the whole thing. At nighttime, you can hear chilling screams from the woods that even scares most experienced woodsmen and hunters. In fact, much of my friends are hunters, very experienced at that, and there's just certain parts of the valley that they stay out of because they claim they have seen things, like large moving shadows, sounds they can identify, and the feeling of being watched that they just can't shake. Now, if that doesn't spook you, I don't know what will. I'm unsure of what kind of monsters live out in the woods, especially out here, but clearly they must be dangerous enough and in great numbers to scare most of my friends, who, again, are very experienced in the outdoors and have spent many years of their lives hunting all sorts of game. One of my closest friends, for the sake of the story, I'll call him Bill. He's an older man, but he has spent much of his life hunting, and so he knows the woods very well. He was telling me about how when he found a full-grown buck lying dead with its head twisted and ripped off its body. The head was just left there, lying next to the body. He said when he found it, it was somewhat of a fresh kill, and whatever or whoever killed this just did it and left it. This was a good-sized buck too, a 5-pointer at that, so there's no reason that somebody would have just come and done this. And when he looked at the skin, he kind of felt a chill go down his spine. Something grabbed this buck and literally ripped its head right off. Twisted it, to be exact. Like when you twist something round and round until the skin finally rips. I don't know what's out there in the woods that can grab a full-grown buck, a 5-pointer, grab it by the head and twist its head till it rips off, and then leave it there. What's the purpose? Why? I don't care to know. All I know is that it terrified me when he told me this. And Bill doesn't scare easily, but he was shaking as he told me this story and retold it to me with perfect punctuation and detail, so I apologize if I don't get every detail to you. Anyway, I know this email isn't very long, but I just wanted to share with you that there are some dangerous things out there in the woods, even around my neck of the woods. I worked as a park ranger for Yellowstone back in the 1970s and 1980s. I've seen some things you'd never believe. The scariest thing I ever saw was one day while on patrol. I saw a mutilated grizzly bear carcass. This was far off the trail. There was no blood, so I knew it had to have been found and killed elsewhere. The grizzly bear appeared to be cut open from its rib cage down to its penis. His internal organs were gone. You could even see into his stomach cavity. I checked out the site and found drag marks and bloody prints. The cut marks were strange, though. They weren't done with just a knife. They looked like they were done with a laser of some kind. Some sort of superheated cutting tool. I'm not sure. So, I went back to the patrol station, calling in some help. We searched and searched, but we never found anything as to what might give us some clues. I still have no idea what killed the grizzly, or who might have done it. I'll never forget it, though. One of my colleagues suggested UFOs, but I'm not that out there with my beliefs. Another one of my colleagues even brought up that it could have been killed by a mythical creature called a Wendigo. I do know that there are stories about a Wendigo, but I never saw any evidence to thoroughly support this notion. However, I was never really out there doing any kind of investigating. But I do have my own Bigfoot story to share with you. I was doing my rounds one day and I saw a Sasquatch. It was way back during the time I actually wrote in a journal. That's why I remember it. I can remember it was very foggy, and I had a hard time seeing. But I saw this huge hairy beast. It was actually crouching up in a tree. I yelled at it, thinking it might be a person, and it jumped down and took off running at incredible speeds. It was the most exhilarating moment of my life. I only wished I had followed it. But I was scared just as much as I was shocked that I had seen a real-life Bigfoot here in Yellowstone. After that, I had kind of become an avid reader of about anything I could get my hands on that thoroughly dealt with Bigfoot. I was even a member of the BFRO, which is the Bigfoot Field Research Organization. I had a lot of respect for John Green and Lauren Coleman. I even had a copy of their classic book, Bigfoot. I even once had the opportunity to go to an international conference in Colorado Springs. That's when I had the opportunity to discuss my own sighting in Yellowstone of the large, hairy ape-like creature that was crouched up in the tree. I will always believe in Bigfoot after that. even though I never had a second sighting. The first will always be with me. Even though I do believe Bigfoot exists, now that I've seen it, I still don't believe in UFOs, unlike many of the people in the Bigfoot community. As far as my park ranging goes, I retired from doing ranger service in the late 80s and started ministry work and teaching. I'm now and have been a pastor, but I can't doubt there aren't wild animals out there we don't know anything about. Back in 1999, I was in a short stint as a search and rescue officer. We had an incident where a hiker had gone missing, and we would later find his remains miles away, far up a steep mountainside. The purpose of this story is to share with you what I've learned. If you hike or plan to hike in the nearby future, and are not thoroughly prepared for emergencies, there is a reasonable chance you will be found much later, deceased. This is not as uncommon as many people think, and certainly not an uncommon occurrence in the outdoors. So, the best thing you can do is prepare in advance. Every year, thousands of people go missing. It's always safe to be prepared. Anyway, we got word that this man had been missing since morning, and he was last seen on one of the main trailheads. So we began going out looking for him. The first thing we do as rescue officers is call for a chopper to do a flyover. The reason for this is to see if there are any obvious things we might have missed. The next thing to do is to send a couple of officers to the last place the person was seen and go looking for their vehicle. We find the vehicle and nothing is really out of the ordinary. Nothing we can find that would help our investigation further. We find the last known trailhead that they hike to. We start hiking up the trail, and the further we go, the more worried we're getting. Of course, we start hiking faster now. We go hard for about 5 miles around, yelling his name, looking for him. Of course, there's no response. I call for the chopper to do another flyover. We did end up finding one piece of evidence, a shoe that belonged to him, that would later be confirmed by forensics, and a shirt which was torn up and had bloodstains all over it. After that, the dogs just lost his scent. We had been searching for 9 hours, and we had a chopper do a total of 2 flyovers. We had the best search dogs in the region at the time. There was no evidence of him, and we were at the point where we were going to call off the search. I was just about to call off the search myself, when one of my officers said, "We think we might have found remains that belong to him. They have found some skull fragments, 3 ribs, and a couple of spine vertebrae, except they were totally bleached white, completely clean, roughly a couple miles away from where he had disappeared, resting by a tree up a steep mountain embankment. They were able to retrieve the remains, located on the top of a ridge. They were only about 2 or so miles away from the trailhead. The reason they had not been found earlier was because they were wedged in the base of a tree. Through analysis, it was concluded that the remains were actually his by DNA, and although it had been less than 24 hours since his disappearance, no one could explain how his actual bones could be so close to the trailhead. How is it that they were so clean? Who or what was able to put them here on top of this ridge? And many, many more questions. The entire case was incredibly strange. I know many more cases like this happen all the time. I mean, how do you go from a human being living to having his bleached, clean bones within 12 plus hours? Anyway, hikers should always carry with them a few things: a map, a compass, a first aid kit, mobile phone, appropriate clothing for climate, food, water, survival tools, a knife, a headlamp, a flashlight, waterproof matches, a space blanket, a whistle, fire starter, and a reflective safety vest. These are just the primary things, just to be safe in case something happens. I hope if you decide to read this, that your viewers and listeners hear this and take heed. If you're going out to the woods to hike, camp, hunt, lollygag, whatever it is you plan on doing, be safe. I'm a search and rescue officer, and it's not uncommon to find bodies in the woods, either accidental deaths or even suicides. The more remote the area, the harder it is to get to. It's not uncommon to find hunters who've been killed by stray bullets. People tend to think about those types of things when they see, for example, a dead body in the woods. But the bodies that scare me the most are the ones where foul play was involved. I can't even tell you how many people, particularly women, have gone missing from this area over the years. People get to be familiar with the names that pop up on the missing persons list. It's not uncommon to hear people talk about the fact that so-and-so is still missing. And I think that's why it's become so common for people to believe that there's something else going on. That's also part of what inspired many books, like Missing 411, for example. I'm a huge fan of David Paulides' work. He deals with a lot. A lot of people have gone missing over the years that have never been found. So, the idea of a person disappearing and being found somewhere else in a state that's unrecognizable, that's something that can be hard for people to swallow, because then you're dealing with a whole different kind of evil. The idea of evil or demonic forces is something like most people are comfortable entertaining than others. So there's a lot of other people who feel like they're close to something that they shouldn't be close to. And I think that's why you have so many people in a community who have experiences like that. I mean, I know that there's a wide speculation of who or what is taking place out in these woods. Who is taking these kinds of people? I mean, we still don't know. Some people believe it's Bigfoot. And if you hear some of these stories that the people talk about, some kind of hairy monster is kidnapping them, it seems. And then, there are people who believe in aliens. We've had UFO sightings in this area too, so there's definitely a lot of strange activity in the area. But the bottom line is, personally, I don't believe in either. I believe in the natural world. I think the explanation is much more earthbound than that. I think it's much more likely to be human or animal related, and less likely than some kind of supernatural evil. The way I look at it is, imagine you're a parent of a little girl. She goes missing. She's gone for 3 days and then she's found. And she's miles away from where she was last seen. She was found in the woods, killed. Now, if you don't know who did that, if you don't know if it was a human or an animal, what do? Do you search for the animal that did it? Or do you search for the human that did it? I think it's more likely to be a human who did it, because I think that's the kind of evil that we can wrap our heads around. When it's an animal, when it's some kind of Bigfoot or alien, it's hard for people to wrap their head around that. So I think that's part of the reason why people think it's an animal. Let's talk finding bodies in the woods. As I've said, I've seen all sorts of gruesome ends to people. One guy had been torn apart by a bear. I've seen others who have died by being exposed to the elements. And yes, suicides are easily the worst. I know of 2 suicides in my area right away that occurred in the woods. One of them was a younger man who had been on the track team at the high school. I don't know the exact details of what happened, but I know that he had been found hanging in the woods, and when he was discovered, there was a loaded shotgun at his feet. Why he did not end up using it, I'm not sure. Another one that will stick with me is a young man, probably no older than 21, who had gotten lost in the woods by himself, and he had Down syndrome and died out there after being exposed to the elements. Not a suicide, but still very sad. I think that's the worst of the worst. It's not the most gruesome, but just sad. I think we all have that sense that when we go out into the woods, we can get lost there. But if you think about the fact that a person with Down syndrome was lost out there and died, that sticks with me. This is a very emotionally taxing job at times. However, Besides bodies, you'll find weird things too, like occult ritualistic killings of people and animals. Those are always disturbing. And yes, they do happen. More often than you think. I decided to go camping on Friday night because, simply, I'm an introvert and I prefer to be alone when I'm not at home. I assumed that it would be a great way to spend an evening and night. I packed up my gear and headed off for a few miles off trail. I was a little worried, but I just tried to focus on the positive. When I get there, I was the only one around. The trail seemed pretty deserted. I was relieved because this is usually a very busy walking trail, even in the early fall. I really enjoy being by myself. The afternoon then went by without any significant incident. Only problem is, I goofed and forgot to bring anything to start a fire. The whole point of me wanting to go camping was because that's just the kind of person I am. Uncomfortable around other people. Not for the most part. So I wanted to spend my Friday night in the woods by myself, with nothing but the sounds of nature to keep me company. I was just about to start a fire when I realized the whole not having anything to start a fire with. No kindling, anything. So I took the time to go exploring, but I could not find any real usable kindling. A lot of the stuff was wet. So now, 20 minutes after sunset, I heard the sound of a branch cracking. I had been trying to get a fire started for some time with semi-wet kindling, but had not had any luck. I paused, listening to the sound of rustling leaves and branches. I was a little concerned that I was out in the woods alone, with just my little camp lantern and my little tent. I was a little scared, but mainly because I didn't have a fire, and I heard the sound again. But this time, it seemed to be getting closer. I was sure that somebody was following me, and I grabbed my knife and shone my lantern in the direction of the sound. A raccoon. A raccoon emerged from the canopy of the leaves, and his tiny black eyes twinkled in the light. I sighed with relief and kind of began to chuckle, thinking it was just nothing. But then, I heard something much larger rustling from behind the tree, nearly only 20 feet away to my left. I spun around, knife at the ready, and I see this huge black wolf emerge from behind the tree and begin to charge straight at me. I didn't even have time to scream, but the sound of my own voice was muffled by the sound of my pounding heartbeat in my ears. I dropped my lantern, run back towards the camp, my knife still raised. I stumbled at least once, but managed to clear the camp. I tried to get into my tent, but this wolf was already circling me. So I turned to look at him, and his eyes were like these glowing white orbs in the dark, and I could just get this overwhelming sense he wanted to kill me. And I closed my eyes, and that's when I heard the sound of his paws retreating into the distance. So I quickly zipped my tent, with my knife at the ready, and the only thing I could hear for the rest of the night was my own breathing. I'm telling you now, I did not sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I found my lantern shattered on the ground. There was also a large canine paw print in the dirt next to it, verifying 100% that I had indeed seen what I did. So now my question, was I attacked by a dire wolf? I was hanging out with some friends when we decided to go to the woods and hike around. We get, I don't know, maybe a mile down the trail, maybe less. We were all being loud and joking around, until we noticed two guys in our direction coming down the trail. We walked closer to them, and I get this weird feeling. They didn't say anything, but they moved strange. Robotic, kind of. One of my friends even got the same feeling. It kind of felt like I was having the energy drained out of me. It felt like it was a warning. I noticed the guy walking in front had no mouth or eyes, and the other guy directly behind him had no face. As soon as they passed, we all ran away. None of us knew what they were. I'm not saying they were aliens, but that's one thing that did come to mind. We told a friend, and I guess he has seen these same guys in the woods lots of times. The only thing I can think of is they are the ones who are causing issues around here. He's also seen them by his house and in the woods. Then, I have another friend who lives on the other side of town, by some more woods. I'm not sure if he saw the same guys we did, or what. But he tells me that he was walking home from a friend's house one night, and he sees a tall figure standing in the middle of the road. He claims it was about 7 feet tall, and wearing a black cloak. He said it was staring at him, and he was terrified. He said he ran as fast as he could, and did not look back. He said he didn't tell anyone about it, except a few of us. He claims he was scared to go back to the road. I asked him if he was sure it was a person, and he said it was. I'm not sure what to make of it myself. Maybe you can. Back in August of 2013, I was going to a hunting spot and had parked. As I'm getting out of the truck, I noticed a very bright light in the sky. It was not a star or a planet. It wasn't moving. I watched it for about a minute, and that is when I noticed it getting bigger and brighter. The light then started to get smaller and dimmer, and then just vanishes. I tried making sense of what I had just seen, but I couldn't. I concluded it was just some sort of aircraft, but it did not move like anything I had seen. It was not a helicopter, a plane, or a satellite. Nor was it a meteor because it did not burn up. It just got big and bright and then disappeared. I should have gotten a picture, but I didn't even think to take one. That is something I now regret. I had not thought about the UFO that I had seen back in 2013 until earlier this year. So, I was actually hanging out with my wife and some friends. One of the guys I was talking with about some UFO stuff, and I told him about the UFO that I had seen back years ago. He told me that he too had seen a UFO once. So, I asked him to tell me about it, and he said he's pretty sure it was just a blimp. I told him from what he described, I did not think it was a blimp, because it was not moving like one. That even mine was just getting bigger and brighter, and just vanished. He tells me that he'd seen other UFOs when he was younger, and even had pictures of them. I was interested, so I asked him if I could see the pictures. He would get them for me. I had my own experience and my own theories about what I saw that morning in August, but I was not sure about my friend's sighting. I wanted to believe what he saw was just some sort of aircraft. I figured that he probably thought that what he saw was a blimp, but it was actually a UFO. I really wanted to see his pictures and compare them to what I saw. So about a week goes by and he gets them to me. I was looking at them, and I noticed they were definitely not a blimp. They were some weird UFO pictures. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but after studying and analyzing these pictures, I realized this was indeed an unidentified flying object. I showed my wife the pictures, and she said that she thought it was a UFO too, captured out in the deep woods. My friend and I, whom shared these pictures with me, were both stunned. I mean, this particular picture we had never seen anything like before. Something we had no idea what it was. We were probably both thinking the same thing, but neither of us said a thing. We just looked at each other. I have showed the pictures to a few other people, and they all agree that it is a UFO. I have not decided if I'm going to keep the pictures or not, but I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure if I want to have proof of what I saw, and risk being called a liar or crazy. I could put the pictures up, of course, on the internet, and maybe get some sort of attention, or maybe I could sell the pictures and become a millionaire. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to process it all, even though it was nearly 8 years ago. I'm not sure what I saw, and I'm still not sure if it was a UFO. I mean, after all, this was not my first experience with a UFO, but it was my first sighting since I was a child. I'm not sure if I'm just becoming more aware or if they are becoming more active, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the changes ahead. I hope that they are not bad aliens, but I'm not sure what to think. I hope they are not here to invade us or hurt us. I hope they are here to help us. I feel like we are getting close to finding out who they are. I feel like we're close to finally finding out the truth. I'm ready to find out what it is really that's out there. I'm ready to find out what I saw that day in August. I just really hope it's nothing bad. I live in the mountains of West Tennessee. I have been seeing things in my backyard for the past 2 years. I have seen a tall, large, black, hairy creature with glowing eyes. It was watching me from the tree line. I have also seen a 2-legged creature with glowing red eyes, chasing my dog. I have seen this exact creature many times over the past couple years. And I've also seen a large black cat, which walked across the front road. It appeared to be the size of a large dog, and I think it might be a panther. It was running very fast. And I've also seen another, different kind of large black hairy creature in my backyard at night, approaching my house. I have seen this particular creature about 5 times since October of 2020. I have seen this creature from a distance of maybe 20-30 feet. That's why I know it's different. It was not a bear, and it was certainly not a dog. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it is real or if it is some sort of spirit. And I'm not sure if it is a spirit, if it's a good spirit or bad one, and if it's evil or benevolent. I do not know if it is here to protect me or to harm me. Even though I've seen it at a distance, it has never once tried to harm me. I don't know why it is here. I don't know what it wants. We do have a lot of thick woods out here, with plenty of places for this thing to hide and stay secluded. In fact, a few months back, while all this stuff is still going on, I'm awakened to the sound of my dogs barking and growling at about 2:33 in the morning. I get up, go to the front door, and I see a large black shape running across the road in front of my house. It is running at breakneck speeds, and I have a friend who actually lives down the road, about 3 miles. He has seen this very same thing many times. The first time he saw it, it was running across the road in front of his house. He watched it cross the road. When it got to the other side, it turned and looked at him. It stopped and looked at him for a while. He said that he knew that it was not a dog, that it looked more like a large, freakish-looking cat. I told him to call the police and make a report. He told me they did not believe him. So, I myself called my own local sheriff's department and told them what I'd seen. And I told them that I know that I have seen a large black panther. They didn't believe me either. And I live just in the city limits of Tullahoma, Tennessee. I've seen this thing many times, and in fact, I've seen it twice this past week. I'm getting tired of it. So, I'm going to try and take a video of it the next time I see it. Wish me luck. I've had the chance to work as a ranger for several years, and in that time, I've gotten a handful of stories and experiences to share with you. Some of them deal with cryptids, while others deal with the paranormal. Here it goes. The first one. I still can't make sense of it all when I look back on this. I was in the park one evening, working, and I was walking around a large lake nearby when I saw this white figure standing on the other side of the lake. I thought it was a person, so I began to walk towards them when they suddenly vanished. And this scared me, so I left. At the time, I had never seen anything like it ever. I convinced myself it was a ghost. I guess I'm not the only ranger out here who has supposedly seen ghost sightings either. I do scare easily too, so that did not help my case. But had you been there in the moment and actually seen this figure kind of just evaporate like mist, you'd have been scared too. My second encounter. Once I had seen a brownish, furry, man-like creature walking along the service road. It was around 7 feet tall and was very fast. I could not get a picture. I saw it around 2 a.m., and it scared me. I was actually with my colleague doing night shift, and I tried to follow it but could not keep up. It was walking on 2 feet and was very hairy, very big. I've heard of Bigfoots like everybody else, but I think this was something else. This one was also right outside of a town in Illinois. My third one that I was hiking around one day in June, when I discovered an incredibly large footprint of something that did not look human in the dirt. I was shocked to find this, as I have never seen anything like it before. It was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen, and I hope whatever had made that was not close by. I stopped and inspected it for a little while, then continued on, when I noticed the atmosphere around me change in the woods. It did not feel good. It felt like imminent danger, and like I needed to leave now. I trusted my gut instinct and I bailed. And by the way, I could not distinguish what animal it came from, the footprint. It wasn't any known animal I know, or was it a person, and it was incredibly large. Number 4. We had gotten complaints about someone trying to break into this gentleman's camper. I was sent to investigate a call at a more popular section of campground around here. When I arrived, I met an older gentleman who was also in the campground, not the person who placed the call. He tells me, though, that he'd heard a strange noise outside his camper window at 4 a.m. He explains to me that he looked outside and saw a large creature with a strange shaped head. It was around 7 feet tall, very thin. It was standing completely upright and looking into his window. He tells me he was too scared to move, so he froze. This thing was very muscular, but also very lean with long arms. He said he was afraid it would break the window and force its way in. So he backed away from the window, grabbed his gun, and hid beneath out of view in his camper. I guess the creature ran back into the woods and disappeared. I had asked him if he had seen it before, and he said no. I asked him to describe it more, and he tells me it was a cross between a gorilla and something else. He seemed very sincere, and so I believe him. Then, I talked to the guy who owned the camper in question, who made the original phone call, and his story was very identical. Saw the same creature, very similar story. There wasn't much I could do. The fifth one. I once had to investigate a report of a possible human body in the water. I was out on a lake looking around. The same lake that I saw the ghostly apparition when I saw something floating in the water. I pulled it towards the boat, and it turned out to be just a small deer carcass. But it wasn't just a typical deer carcass. The thing had been cut open. No organs, nothing. Even its eyes were missing. And not like ripped out or gouged out, but like surgically removed. No blood or anything anywhere. This thing couldn't have been in the water for more than a few hours, judging by how wet it was and its decomposition. So I asked myself, why would anybody do this? That was definitely a strange one. The sixth, I had yet another Bigfoot sighting of my own. I was out on a patrol when I saw some movement in the woods. It was dark out, so I couldn't make out much, but I see this large, hairy figure moving quickly through the woods. I want to make a note that this one looked completely different than the last one I saw with my colleague. I had my spotlight on, and I shined it on the figure. It had a very large head and was covered in thick black hair. It was very large, built like a bodybuilder, except more exaggerated features. It was hard to guess its height, but I'd guess it to be around 7 to 8 feet. This thing didn't stay illuminated for more than a second before darting quickly into the trees to stay hidden. You could hear it crashing through the woods, trying to get away from this light source. so I grabbed my radio and called it in. I was interviewed by my colleagues, and everybody seemed to believe me, but there wasn't much they could do. I never saw it again. Okay, number 7. It was the summer of 2012, and I was patrolling again in the woods. I came upon an area where some ropes were tied to a tree stump. I was confused at what kind of activity would have been going on here. Then, I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I see 2 faintly glowing eyes staring at me. I could see they belonged to a very large animal, just outside of view, behind the thicket and foliage. So I freeze, being very cautious to not move wrong. Then I hear a growl. So I slowly started backing away to my vehicle, and I could hear it making these nasty gnashing sounds with its teeth, like it was furious I was there. I didn't see the creature anymore, but I heard it. Once I got out of the area, I didn't hear the growls anymore, but man, that was definitely one of the spookiest moments on the job. I got more stories, but this is just all of them off the top of my head for now. Yes, I've had so many paranormal happenings and things go on while I've worked for the wildlife, fish and game, and forest industry. If you think this is a lot, some of my colleagues I've talked to have stories and experiences that make mine look like kindergarten. It's a labor of love, though. You have to enjoy what you do. Maybe when I get more time, I'll sit down and send you more of my stories. I'm sure you get many stories about people camping in the Ozarks, and to be fair, I know from my own friends and family alone that a lot of weird, creepy stuff goes down up there. I too have had a weird experience while up there, the last time I was up there. This is a time that I was camping by myself, and it was in the morning. I decided to walk down to a nearby creek to go fishing. I was walking down the trail when I noticed a deer run by me, as if it were scared. This was a little peculiar to me. Usually when you walk down a trail, nothing runs to you, especially a deer. It was as if it was being chased by something. Whatever, I shrugged it off and walked down a little further to the creek. I looked around and did not see anything, so I set up my fishing gear and started fishing. It was a beautiful morning out, and I was really enjoying the quiet. But as I'm fishing, this overwhelming musty odor just totally assaults my nostrils. It was so overpowering that I had to put my fishing pole down and scan my surroundings. I didn't see anything, and the smell was only getting stronger. So I walked up a little further to see if I could find the source, and I noticed this small little dugout cave that went underneath the creek. I looked around for a minute and decided to go check it out. There was enough light peering through from the outside that you can get a pretty good idea of how big this chamber was. So I kind of walked down into it and noticed right away how large it was. I mean, it was big enough for a grown man to fit in. I looked around and noticed that there were a bunch of bones and even some dried up deer carcasses all around. I kind of got the creeps. Something was bedding down in there for sure. And I'm telling you now, it was not a bear or a mountain lion. How do I know that? Well, because their dens don't look like this. This was a perfect little den for something else, but definitely not a bear or a mountain lion. So I walked back up to my fishing spot, maybe a quarter mile away, and sat down. I started fishing again, and after a short while, I began hearing voices. Not just one voice, but a bunch. I could hear people laughing and talking, so I stood up and looked around again, and I didn't see anything. Now I'm convinced I'm hearing things, but now I'm hearing footsteps all around me, and it sounded as if people were walking all over with me in the trees. I keep looking around but don't see anything. Then I hear a woman screaming, and I noticed the lighting in the sky was suddenly changing. Had I not been out there for more 2 hours, because now it was getting dusk. How is this possible? I had just left about 8 or 9 in the morning, and when I checked my phone, it was about 10:02. I had officially entered the Twilight Zone, it felt like. I got freaked out, packed up my stuff, and walked back to camp. I walked the entire way back and did not see or hear anything. I get back to my camp, start a fire, and I was going to cut my trip short and leave first thing in the AM. Somehow, 2 hours had turned into 8 or 10, and I know for a fact I endured some strange time anomaly. I'm sure I sound like Alex Jones saying that, but I'm telling you, I'm really good at time management, and it is physically impossible for me to waste that much time to have gone down there, at least without keeping track. It's only a 20-minute walk down to the creek from the camp, and I even checked my phone that said it was 11:03 a.m., right before I checked that cave out. I really don't know what happened out there, but I do know I will never go back to camp there again. I think I just witnessed some kind of portal to another time or dimension open up. I don't know. That whole night while trying to sleep, I just had this really anxious feeling that I could not shake. I felt nervous and uncomfortable. I can't describe it. I finally fell asleep, but woke up several times that night, like something was watching me beyond my tent. When I woke up the next morning, one of my fishing poles was broken, and my equipment thrown all around. I just said screw it and left. I'm not going back there again. I mean, I'm sure it was just a coincidence that my pole is broken and my stuff torn and thrown everywhere, right? Right. I'm not going back. That, my friend, was actually the very last time I ever camped up there. Haven't gone up that high on the mountains since that happened. I don't know what kind of X-File craziness I encountered. Aliens or interdimensional beings or what have you, but no thank you.